Vendlet. I hadn't heard about it before. It was at the Disabled Living Foundation Moving and Handling People conference in London. I came across it while I was wandering around the exhibition in my lunch break. I was quite fascinated, so I watched and I stayed and played and investigated and missed my workshop. The main benefits for service users, I think, are that they can have less hands-on interventions. They don't have to have carers actually physically rolling around on the bed, so it's less intrusive and better for their dignity. It gives them a better, smoother experience of being moved around on the bed, and that's got to be beneficial for people. I think the benefits for the family are that with the Vendlet installed, there's less need for multiple carers, so there's fewer people going through the house. That can be really intrusive, lots of wear and tear on carpets. Somebody in the family has to be there to let carers in a lot of the time, but also I think often the family can use the Vendlet themselves, so that reduces the need for there to be carers coming in and out all the time. The main benefit for carers and care staff is that it can reduce the risk of carer injury. There's very high rates of musculoskeletal injuries among carers when they're moving people on the beds. It's very difficult for them. There's a lot of reaching, a lot of stretching, a lot of pushing, and a lot of pulling. A lot of sickness among carers is through these injuries, and it actually removes that risk because it's doing the work, the physical work for the carer. They're not having to do it themselves. It makes their life a lot easier. It's going to be less fatiguing for them because they're not working so physically hard, and it means that they're going to give the clients a better experience. I put a Vendlet in place for a gentleman I worked with. He was quite a large gentleman. He was fairly tall. He weighed about 21, 22 stone. His wife had, I think it was 3 carers 4 times a day to assist with personal care. He was very depressed. He stayed in bed all the time. The only time he got out of bed was when his wife got him out, or the carers got him out to change the sheets. It was a very difficult situation. He didn't like having all those carers going in. His wife felt that she couldn't go out very much because there were carers constantly in and out. And it meant that the care package could be reduced right down to 1 carer twice a day to help with personal care. And the rest of the time, his wife was able to transfer him in and out of bed, insert the sling, get him out of bed into his chair so she could change the sheets. If he wasn't able to get out of bed for any reason, she could actually change the sheets while he was still in bed, and she could do all that by herself. I worked with a lady with dementia. She was very verbally aggressive towards the carers and sometimes physically aggressive as well. They found it really, really difficult to carry out any personal care with her because she would just spit and scream and pinch and slap. It was really hard for them. They were really, really struggling. So she wasn't able to move around on the bed independently. The carers had to move her. So we put the Vendlet in, and it was a much more hands-off experience for her. And once she got used to the motion of the Vendlet, provided the carers warned her that she was going to be moved, she was much calmer when having personal care carried out. Something that was really interesting about that was after a few months, she actually started initiating movement on the bed, and we took the Vendlet out, which was great. I don't know quite why that happened, but I think it's because the Vendlet mimics natural movement. It maybe helped her relearn some movement that she'd lost while she was in hospital. Well, I would advise an OT who was considering a Vendlet for a client to look at any evidence. If they know of any OTs who've used them, had them installed, talk to them and find out what happened, and how successful it was, but also to look at funding, which these days is vitally important, and if it would reduce care needs or if it would address a person's health condition. But I think evidence and funding are the two main things that I would consider. And also, I think something that is really helpful to look at is ergonomic systems, ergonomic assessments like rapid entire body assessment, which will give an indication of the risk of musculoskeletal injury to carers. Something called the Borg scale, which is a scale of perceived exertion, which you can use with carers or the client, and that will give an indication of how hard an activity is, and you can use that before a piece of equipment is put in and after, which will give you some evidence of how successful it's been. I think they're the three main things. There was one lady I worked with, and I think this is quite important. She suffered severe neuropathic pain and she would scream when the carers touched her. It was really, really quite traumatic for everybody, and we tried the Vendlet and it worked really well because it was much more hands-off. It wasn't being touched, so she wasn't getting that pain. For her that was really helpful, and for the carers because they didn't feel quite so awful about trying to deal with somebody who was screaming when they touched her. I think that it's a really good piece of equipment in terms of reducing care packages, but I do think that it's really important that there's something really robust in place for carer training to make sure it's being used properly. I get the feeling that in some areas it's considered to be quite a complex piece of equipment, but really I don't think it's actually any more complicated than using a hoist, and there's a lot less risk of injury to clients. People can fall out of hoists if things aren't fitted properly. They're not going to fall out of the Vendlet if it isn't fitted properly. It would be hard not to fit it properly.